Good evening. Thank you. Okay, so really all I can say, that's all I've been saying in the last few minutes, is just, wow, this is amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here for our evening in celebration of our Montana Poet Laureate, Chris Latreille. My name is Celia, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist at the Missoula Public Library, so it is my pleasure to welcome you all here. And yeah, to celebrate Chris, to have Corrie here with us. I mean, I'm very delighted and extremely grateful that they both were able to make it here, because we weren't really sure that was going to happen. So yeah, they're going to share poems, their words, probably a lot of BS. But, and I mean Buffalo stories. Yeah, and as we get started this evening, it's actually, I have the honor of presenting a drum group, Red Sand, who is here this evening to honor Chris and his accomplishments, and also the bringing together of this community around words and around a celebration of Chris and Corrie and the larger just community that fosters. So please, I would invite you all to stand. Please remove your hats if you're wearing one and face the group. Thank you. Thank you, Red Sand. And actually, so it takes a village to kind of put all these things on. So we have a number of people to thank. Thank you to Anna East for her gracious support with bringing Red Sand here this evening to honor Chris. And thank you to Missoula Community Media Resource, who is here this evening filming. Thank you to Montana Public Radio, who is here recording. Yeah, everyone's here. Thank you to Fact and Fiction, who are in the back there selling books. So yes, buy books locally, buy tonight, and then get your works signed by our poets, who will be available at the end of the evening to mingle and sign, and for however long they can take it, I guess. And then also a very special thanks to the Missoula Public Library Foundation, who supported this entire evening and also works to support the arts within the library all the time. But yeah, thank you so much. So just a little bit about how tonight will kind of flow. We're going to have obviously two readers this evening. So Corrie will read, and then Chris will read, and then we'll have them here between two succulents, not two ferns. And it will be, they'll be having conversation with sharing stories, and then we will hope to open it up for a discussion with the audience, a Q&A portion of things. We do ask in that part of things, we will have some microphones to pass around, and so if you have questions, we would hope that you would wait for us to bring you a microphone. Since everything is being recorded, that will help us. It also helps the audience, but so yeah, I know it's a little cumbersome, but just wait, and we'll get to you. So yeah, let's begin. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Corrie here this evening. I think you've been here once before. Yes, for the Montana Book Festival. And I met Corrie through Chris, actually, in Lewistown, where she resides. And I am unsurprised that such a lovely person writes such beautiful words. She's had a lot of wonderful things said about her by people who are far more eloquent than I am, so I'll read a little bit of that. But Corrie is a writer multiple in her identities: an anthropologist of imagination, an archaeologist of the heart, a naturalist observing the world with acuity and praising it with dense music. I couldn't have said that better. Hers is not a narrow view, and the myriad points of view she employs are informed by history, science, and poetry itself. Corrie Williamson is the author of 2 books of poetry, most recently The River Where You Forgot My Name, which was named a 2019 Montana Book Award honor book by the Montana Library Association. Her first book, Sweet Husk, won the 2014 Perugia Press Prize and was a finalist for the 2015 Library of Virginia Poetry Award. She has taught writing at the University of Arkansas, Helena College, and Carroll College, and worked as an educator in Yellowstone National Park. She was the recipient of the 2020 Penn Northwest Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency, and her poems have appeared in journals such as the Southern Review, Ecotone, the Kenyon Review, the Missouri Review, and many others, as well as the absolutely gorgeous new book, Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, Poetry. She lives in Lewistown, Montana, and works in conservation. Welcome, Corrie.
Thank you so much, Celia, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you all for being here. Oh my gosh, I've never seen a crowd like this for a poetry reading. It's bringing me a lot of joy. Thank you also to Chris for asking me to be part of this tonight. I feel like the universe has kind of been bringing me into your circle a little bit over the past couple years, mostly in relation to Buffalo and poetry, and what could be better than that. So thank you, and it's such an honor to get to celebrate your Poet Laureateship with you. Somebody was saying earlier that this is like Chris's unveiling, but I think that the fact that you all are here means you know already what a treat it is to get to listen to Chris and spend time with his work. So I'm going to read a little bit before I turn it over to him. And as Celia mentioned, I have 2 books in the world. Sorry, I'm organizing my life up here. And I'm going to read a poem from each of those books and then some newer work as well. So I'm going to start tonight with a poem that I used to read quite a bit as sort of the first poem when I was doing a lot of readings for this book, when this came out in 2014. I always hesitate to say when I was on book tour because, like, oh my gosh, what is a poetry book tour? Although that reminds me that Chris promised that he was going to make like a rock tour style t-shirt of all the places he visited during his Poet Laureateship. So I hope that's still the plan, and I hope I get one. But this was kind of, when I was doing all these readings for this book, this was sort of my warm-up poem. It was nice to have a ritual, a poem that I always began with. And this one made a lot of sense to me because, well, for 2 reasons. The first is that it's all one sentence. And so it felt kind of like breath work. It felt like sort of an Ave Maria and a way to warm up to reading poems. And the other thing is that it's a little bit of a sad poem. It's a poem I wrote for my sister after she had lost sort of her first love, a young man who died when he was 28 of prostate cancer. And a few years later, I saw this young man's grandmother greet my sister. And it just, that reception had all the grief and the possibility and the gorgeousness of their relationship in it. And I wanted all of that in a poem. And so when I would read this poem first, it was also sort of my way of saying, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is the kind of poet that I want to be and the things I want to share. So this is called Where the Sentence Ends, the Sentiment Burgeons. Years since the old woman's grandson turned early to ash, and years since she's seen the young woman who was his lover, but seeing her now extends her arms, crying, "You look just the same," as that first day coming up the driveway. I saw you forking hay from a feed trough as the chaff drifted in the sun and in the long, wild loops of your hair, waving and laughing as if I knew you already, and him leaning on the pitchfork and smiling, the black seed of his dying already planted between his hips, brittle and black as a walnut, smiling as if he'd live forever, or perhaps as if he knew, but it was all right, because that night he would lie by the young woman below the grandparents' bedroom with the windows wide and know the yard gonged with the deep blue temple bells of hyacinth, that the cows sucked moisture from the dark, and the owl in the barn laid her eggs slowly through the night's course so that the hatchlings would wake and feed on one another, and the girl's hair was a great mystery flowing over him to mix with his young man's beard, red as fallow paint on a Swedish cottage, or red as the tongue of the bowsprit his brother will invoke not long from now, wishing to launch the body out to sea, burning, and red as the ruff of twin foxes who bark and snarl, chasing each other through alfalfa rows until they both roll, showing the golden scythe of their bellies to the moon, and she shows them hers. Oh gosh. You guys are so nice. You don't have to clap for every poem. You're so sweet. So I'm going to jump around a little bit and read a poem that I wrote during the residency that Celia mentioned. So in 2020, I was the fellow at the Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency, and I spent 7.5 months living in a tiny off-the-grid cabin 2 hours from any kind of town without Wi-Fi or cell service, along the wild and scenic Rogue River. And it was probably the single greatest gift of my life, and really rewired my brain and slowed it down and made it more attentive and more thoughtful. And one of the sort of obsessions I had there was around kind of safety and danger and harm and the fine lines between those things and how hard it is to actually just live in the world without causing damage. And I also tried when I was there to have a meditation practice, and I think this poem will tell you how that went. But if you're not familiar with the idea of the metta meditation, it's a very simple meditation where you basically wish sort of peace and safety and health for other beings. It's kind of a repetition of may all beings be safe, may all beings be well, and that kind of thing. So this is called meditation. Quiet, I say to the mind, and the mind says, frog song, bear emergence, death of all salmon kind, local proliferation of buried nuclear silos, tomorrow's breakfast, blossom riot of bees in pollen tresses, a child reaching into a sleek, unlocked gun safe. May all beings be safe, I go on, and the mind hears only scriffle-scutter of mice in the insulation. May all beings be well, I insist, and the mind pries open the eye to see one like a fat, suede knuckle, paw tucked, slinking behind the stove, along the corner and out of sight. May all beings know contentment in hard times. The mind reminds me that mice are thigmotactic and hug a wall like a mother's hip. Ah, little cannonball of knowing. May all beings know peace, I say, but the mind already is planning where to put the poison. It really stinks when mice eat your avocados and you drove like 4 hours to town to get avocados. I'll read another poem from that time, from that residency. One of the really special things about this location where I was living is that it's situated in the midst of a 100-year-old apple orchard that's just gnarly and wild and unpruned, and there's nobody out there to enjoy the apples except you and the bears. And I really like apple butter. And so when all the apples fell in the fall, I was really determined to make apple butter. But like I did not have electricity. But I had brought my electric blender, my immersion blender, and I had a generator. And so I used my generator to make apple butter. This poem is called Using a Generator Indoors Can Kill You in Minutes. Using a generator indoors can kill you in minutes, I read on the big red and black Honda before firing it up inside, right next to the propane stove. Because it is fall and the birds know it and wing away, just as the lizards in the woodpile know and slow their scuttling, while the walnut knows and in the strange way of the world seals off its own leaves to die by draining from them the blood of the sun. And the apple trees know and unburden themselves. And I am turning their year's work into butter because little in the world strikes me as holy wealth so much as food jarred in clean glass, which I am lucky to find in a year where the whole unlucky nation has turned to canning like the metaphor it is. A year I spent mostly watching the wind, which churns now in the forest, calving limbs from trees to lay across the road, which will necessitate the use of another tool that could at any moment lead me to dusty death, that old unreliable chainsaw, toothy as a bear trap, with its orange warning sticker of an arm shorn of its hand. Though wouldn't it be handy if the world itself came with a warning, telling us what is safe, what dangerous, crisp clear as one sweet apple and one tart, which is how you make the butter best worth saving, sealed tight with a bright pa-ting that means tomorrow and perhaps tomorrow. I'm going to read one from my newer book, The River Where You Forgot My Name. And I've been thinking a lot today on my drive over from Lewistown just about, I don't know, whenever I go to poetry readings, I'm like, why do I write poems? What is the point of poems? Why are poems? And I was just thinking a lot about attention. And I think this is a poem about kind of the attention that we pay, and in particular to words. And it's called Maybe I Should Eat That. And it's from my friend Lisa Allen Ortiz, who is a wonderful poet. Maybe I should eat that, she thinks. Upon seeing the poem, she had already noticed that now her daughter has cut from the pages of The New Yorker and left on the kitchen table like an offering of thin bread, rice paper, lemon rind, dried curd. Its text shavings of clove curling, about birds clustering on humming wires, what they know and don't, like these starlings in my apple tree clattering the twilight. Maybe I should eat that, she thinks, but not like in the tale of Winterburner spooning D.H. Lawrence's ashes into his morning cuppa. No, like grapefruit, wood smoke, lilac, like leaning in to listen, the way jealousy of a fine poem is delicious, lavender on the wrist, the mint in my mother's field that would sprawl forth its scent when hoof and warm hide stirred through it on the way to maw grass, passed twice through the belly. Maybe I should eat that, she thinks, the way handling wool is satiating like a slow chew, the work of our muscles in our own cupped ears, the deep moving muscle of the world. Maybe I should eat that. Maybe taste is the tuner of attention, attention the mother of kindness, the tongue's attention cultivating as a garden, the frolicking flora and fauna in the tender cage, the glittering set table of our gut around which we gather. You guys just won't quit. This is a poem about the phenomenon known as mast fruiting, which is basically for like nut trees and a lot of wild fruits. Sometimes you have like an off year. Trees won't produce fruit for a year or more at a time. And then often you'll get this mast phenomenon where all these trees in a forest or a county or a state will have this huge crop and this huge fruit, and we don't know why. Like we don't get it. And I was thinking about this poem and this recently. I was very privileged to get to travel over the past couple weeks, and I was in Romania and just walking through this village, and this beautiful older lady kind of came out to our group. We were walking up her street, and she said, "Where are you from?" And we said, "Not here. We're from America." And she said, "Come in." And she brought us into her garden, and she had these apple trees and these walnut trees, and she said, "Just pick everything, take what you want." And I had like 6 walnuts, and I was like so invested in bringing them back to the US for my sister, who is a witch and who likes to plant things. And I like got them all the way to Boston, and then I like panicked that like some sniffer dog was gonna like catch me, and we were like late for our flight, and they were gonna drag me into like the ag room, and we'd like never get out, and then we missed our flight anyway, and I ditched the walnuts in a bathroom in Boston. I'm really sad. This is called To My Sister on the Matter of Trees. Our father takes a chainsaw to the dropped oak, and it becomes a cord, beautiful word for the life we burn. That old wood stove goes on warming the living room from below. Look close, and there's still no denying the ache of adding ring upon ring, years of drought or plenty turned to heartwood and core. This winter, my brain shuddered under snow, believing for the first time in the night, in my own turning to smoke, lapis twist and curl above the house, a breath, a scent, dissolution. Spring, and I wait, ropey, unsure when to unspool, like the currents of sweetness the maples weep on your land. You write to say, I buried a squirrel drowned in the sap bucket. I write to say, I cannot get right the poem about the man chopping wood, how our days rise, cleave, fall away. You tell me then that after 5 years on 30 acres covered in black walnut forest with no harvest to speak of, you cut the largest tree at the top of the hill. The following autumn, the rest rained down in abundance, their green husked fists of seed. How am I doing? I'm just gonna do one more and then kick it to Chris, if I can find it. This poem I wrote as I was leaving that residency in the Rogue, and really just sort of thinking through all the ways that it had changed me and the way it changed how I observed things. And maybe I won't say any more about it. Mercy me, said the women folk where I was raised. And in my mind, mercy was a verb, the action reflexive. Though, of course, the wolf in the kingdom of winter does not mercy the elk. The owl does not mercy the hair that has trembled loose from its delicate coat of stillness. The word's been used since the 12th century to mean God's forgiveness of his creatures' offenses. Such mercy is not what my father had in mind when he asked me to take a pistol to live in the wilderness. I didn't. That was not how I imagined my days, strapping its cold weight to my hip, a saunter to the river. Good morning, larkspur. Good morning, death camas and moonflower. I am more deadly than you. Would I slip it into the crook of the quince tree while I crouched to weed kale? And would I, after all, shoot a bear eclipsing my doorway? Would I shoot a man? Back home, another gun in the safe where my bedroom dresser used to stand. Out there, the news, a loaded gun, returns again and again to the loaded gun. Here, the old growth murmurs at night, the dark's bones groan and creep. Once, barefoot in starlight, the color of ginger root, trembling on the porch at the unknowable's cacophony, the dog in a huff, I wondered if the fear, in the end, would get me first. On the long, hawk-spangled drive east, all things appeared to me as bodies. The log haulers piled with the fallen forms of fur coming down from the mountains. Chicken trucks with their live cargoes crushed into hunchback and the smashed daisies of feathers from which a dim red eye looks out. Across the frostbit flatlands of Idaho, gleaming silver trucks piled with fleshy potatoes, bodies, bodies, and on the radio, a story about a body unearthed from high in the Andes, a woman's form arrayed with spear and axe head, a big game hunter. I want to summon a blessing on this vanishing year, but I forget how this works, what to say, in what order. I'm thinking of my good Aunt Sue, who for all those years, and even after the chemo and the electroshock therapy, tucked her pale, delicate chin at table and said with quavering, but without irony, "We give thanks." The moon's between the fir's ribs, up there in the god-dark black. The fox still moves in the roots and the rust. You could say and not lie that this is most of what I long for in the way of distance and the way of desire. May the fetters fall from all of us this year. May the wild light get way down in our bones. May we, without requital, mercy one another with hands like wings, with unarmed hands. Thank you so much, everybody. Here's Chris.
But first, here's Celia. So, wow, it's hard to be in between two poets because no matter what words I say, they're not going to be that beautiful. But yeah, thank you so much, Corrie. That was lovely. So what to say about Chris? I think I have a lot of gratitude to him for being such a wonderful friend to the library, to start with, which is how I met him. He was here on our grand opening. He's been with us by teaching poetry classes. He's just a huge supporter of this space, and I'm extremely grateful in that way. But more so, as many of you can probably say in this room, he's just a wonderful friend, and he's a wonderful, caring person to have in your life. And I think that shines through in everything that he writes. His writing is much like him as a person. One moment it's emotional and beautiful and it's evoking tears, and then the next moment it's like pulling thunder down from the sky, right? And blasting everyone in its path. So it's sort of the poet and the rock star, and maybe the everything in between. And I think when I think of him as a poet, I know that first and foremost, I think of him as a storyteller, which, I mean, really isn't that what poetry is? It's just a story and a sharing and a bringing people together and a continual growth from whatever the roots are, and it just brings it forth and grows and all the leaves that sprout from it. So anyway, I won't ramble, but I'm so thankful to have you here, and I couldn't think of anyone more that I would be pleased to introduce as our Montana Poet Laureate. So now I'll just read your bio. Chris Ledre is a Métis storyteller and an enrolled member of the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians. His third book, Becoming Little Shell, will be published by Milkweed Editions in 2024. His first book, One Sentence Journal, Short Poems and Essays from the World at Large, won the 2018 Montana Book Award and a 2019 High Plains Book Award. His second book, Descended from a Travel-Worn Satchel, was published in 2021. Chris writes the weekly newsletter, An Irritable Métis, and he is the newly appointed Montana Poet Laureate. And we're so lucky to have you here.
Bonjour. Intinue Maganadog. Hello, all of my relatives. The great philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And the turnout tonight is the punching in my face. I'm just kind of moved beyond words by everybody here, and I have such deep gratitude for that. Now I'm going to try and go back to my plan. I'm Anishinaabe, Chippewa Cree, Assiniboine, French, Czech, and Dane. Son of voyageurs, survivors, and kinship keepers. I am one of those who the Cree people north of the medicine line called Otepemesnawak, which means the people who own themselves, the Métis. I am Métis, and I own every bit of myself. I rise from the valley formed by the mighty Red River of the north, who has carried my people's tears of joy and my people's tears of sorrow, all the way from millennia to Hudson's Bay, north of what settlers now call Manitoba, Canada. Well, today I am of the Clark Fork River, whose banks I all but reside on, in the drainage of the great Columbia River, who washes the western continent into the Pacific Ocean. I am of Big Spring Creek in Lewistown, where my buffalo-seeking ancestors settled for a time without harassment and made a new life, though those years were short. I am of Mill Creek, of the community where I first wandered alone and barefoot in what seemed to me to be wilderness. And today I am of Edith Creek, where hidden groves of red cedar and larch provide shade and companionship on even the hottest days of summer. I emerged from the Turtle Mountains and the Judith Mountains of central Montana. And my mountain is Chappaqua, the peak I grew up in the shadow of and yet reside where my Salish relatives call Shining Mountain or gray treeless mountaintop. I'm of many communities my people found themselves unwelcome in, though we have resided on this land Since Wayne first pried that little bit of soil from Wajashpa and remade the world on Mesquadessy's broad back. The settlers don't miss us, but our mother, the earth, most certainly does. She does not forget, and more of us remember our connection to her with every day that passes. She is patient in welcoming us home. I'm Anishinaabe. We are all Anishinaabe. And I say again, Buju in Dinoe Muganadog. Hello, all of my beautiful, kind, wonderful relatives. I teach poetry for the Missoula Writing Collaborative on the reservation. I've done that for a few years up in Ronan. There's a story I like to tell about a young fourth grader who wrote what's called an acrostic poem. And what an acrostic poem is where you take a word and then you make new lines or new single words from the letter in that word. And her example was cat. And the words that the poem that she wrote from cat was crying at the party. And everybody always assumes, oh, that's so terrible, that poor girl. And I say, no, you could be crying with joy, which I am literally doing at my own party. Crying at the party. Who knew that that poem was going to come up and sneak up on me at some point in the future? I do owe some thanks. I know Celia covered a lot, but thank you to the library for hosting this wonderful event. And thank you to the Library Foundation for sponsoring it. Thank you to all of you for coming out. Thank you to Celia for the hard work putting this together. I try and be easy to work with, but I am often not. And I appreciate her going the distance because this would not be what it is without her efforts. And there are people on my list that I would like to thank that are here, that I am here because of them. And sadly, I expected there'd be like 12 people with a bunch of chairs and it'd be easy to pick them out so I couldn't forget. But I do know my mom is here. My mom came to my games when I was a fat little leaguer. She came to my games when I was a fat YMCA soccer player. When my friends and I were rocking in Seattle, at times she came all the way out to Seattle to watch us play. And she comes to all of these things. So Mom, wherever you are in here, yeah, there she is. Thank you so much. I love you. Fact and Fiction is here, selling books. My friends Bryn and Mara are here. They are absolutely essential to me being here right now. The time I spent at the bookstore was so formative, and it probably helped sitting at a desk 3 feet from the poetry section for 5 years. I've said in this very room before that if anybody messed with Bryn, I would tear this city down in his defense. And I would do the same for Mara. And I would do the same for Barb Thoreau, who started Fact and Fiction and gave me my first opportunity. I don't know if my friend Mark Gibbons is here or not, a previous Poet Laureate, but he has been invaluable as a mentor to me and a friend and someone to just drink beer and complain about everything with. So thanks to Mark and thanks to him for the wonderful efforts he made as Poet Laureate and the body of video evidence of all poets, like more than 50 or 60 he did, it just downstairs from this room. And so let's give it up for Mark, whether he's here or not. I'm going to give it up to Julia, who's sitting back there next to my mom, who has been my biggest supporter for 20 years now. So I would not be here without her constant support as well. Someone was saying, look at all those people. And I'd say, you know what? It wouldn't be the first time that I stepped to a microphone and everybody immediately left. And the only one in this room who knows that for a fact is my friend Steve Jacobs, who's providing the sound or the lights for tonight. He is the drummer in my devastatingly loud rock band, American Falcon. So thank you to Steve for putting in the effort to bring it to light this thing up. I want to thank my friend Anna East, who provided the drums, who has been absolutely essential to my learning about the greater indigenous community, even though she is indigenous. She is native. She has put in the time. She's learned the culture, and she has taught me so much about what is going on in the world in arenas that I had no idea was happening, related to language, related to preserving culture, relating to the people doing that work. And I think that work is going to be so essential to the rest of my life. I would not be where I am when it comes to that without her efforts. So thank you for the drums. Thank you for your very, very smart input. Thank you to the Red Sand drummers who already bolted. That was awesome. But that's what you do. You drum and then you beat it. Get it? You didn't know you were going to get a stand-up show either, did you? And thank you finally to my good friend Corrie Williamson for settling me down with her beautiful poetry. And when Celia and I were talking about who would we have to participate in this, I said, well, what about Corrie? And I don't think I even got that E had even stopped echoing out into the universe. And Celia was like, yes, 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 text her, do it, email her, get her. So thank you for coming. I want to continue now actually with some poems. And what I want to do, as Poet Laureate, I've really become a really good emailer. I haven't written a poem, I don't think, since this whole thing started. And honestly, I haven't written that much in the last couple of years because I've been absolutely focused on my next book, Becoming Little Shell, which took a lot longer than it should have. But just this week, it was moved into copy edits. We're already looking at cover things, and it's going to be out next summer, and I'm very, very excited for that. But probably the thing I'm most grateful for is that first little book, One Sentence Journal, which came out on August 14th, 2018. And it was on August 14th, 2023, when Governor Gianforte called me and said, I don't know what poetry is, but I would like you to be the Poet Laureate. And there were a lot of people who said, yeah, it's great to be Poet Laureate, but it's too bad that it had to come from that governor. And what I think of it, though, is I feel like it was a subversive act by all these people who have Googled his name and mine to see the things that I've said in public about him. And I treat that like it's easy to downplay this. Like, well, who really cares about being Poet Laureate of Montana? But you know what? I care. I care. Yeah, give it up. Give it for the... Because there are people devoting their lives to the arts that have to operate in this hellscape that Montana is trying to become. And it's through art that we fight back. So here's a little excerpt from One Sentence Journal about winter. And what One Sentence Journal was, for those of you who don't know, was I had begun a practice of writing one sentence in my notebook every day when I had this job that I despised. And at the end of the day, I would think, I just gave my whole day, the only day of this whatever day it is that I'm ever going to have, and I've done nothing to fight back with art. So then I decided I'm just going to start writing one sentence every day related to something I did or encountered or overheard or whatever. And it became this practice in paying attention. And I wasn't just paying attention to the things around me. I was paying attention to my life in a way that I never had before. What was going on outside of me and what was going on inside of me. And it became invaluable in my just training to become a creative person in a way that I never would have. And I started doing that in 2013, I believe it was. And the very first entry was, And I dedicate this to my friend sitting at the end of the aisle here in the front row, sitting with James Lee Burke at Les Schwab Tire. I knew who Jim was at the time. He didn't know me, and we have since become friends. And I am so grateful to have you here, Jim. So here are some excerpts about winter, my favorite season. File with favorite sounds of winter, the rattling clatter and rhythmic clang like sleigh bells of passing tires wrapped in chains. Night, old Highway 10, the reach of my high beams sparkling with frost at their outer edges. I reflect on all the life out in the frozen dark, just trying to hang on until morning. River Channel iced over tells an exciting story with crisscrossing tracks of unnamed critters, while two great blue herons on the bank opposite, several hundred yards apart from each other, stand frozen like mirror images staring into the shivering water. A raven perches on a fence post, her beak working, facing a palomino gelding a yard distant who tosses his head, teeth bared, and I wonder just what exactly they are talking about. This is for the poet Robert Lee. Inspired by a book of poems, I write, I am made of boots scraping on snow, frost on the inside walls of my closet, and clouds of breath hanging in the air of my childhood bedroom. Arrived home in late evening, moonlight sparkling on snow sculpted by wind, then stood out under the stars for many deep breaths after filling the bird feeders by porch light. On a bluebird morning, I choose slow over fast to get where I am going, and I'm rewarded with a view of the local bison herd up close to the fence. Round backs covered with snow and frost, breath clouds of steam in the sunlight, and two young bulls circling and lunging in a game of playful sparring. A grandmother hands over her dead husband's Carhartt jacket to the happy grandson who finds his grandfather's stash of hard candies still stuffed in its pockets 3 years gone. Came to me to realize that this practice was my spiritual practice. And it didn't come to me until after I had been doing it for several years, just being out in the world and observing it. As an Anishinaabe person who is not part of Anishinaabe community, I don't have elders to learn from. I don't have a community to celebrate our ceremonies with. And the ceremonies I do know, I either do them by myself or I make them up as I go. And I'd realized what I'd been doing through this process was reconnecting to the world the way my ancestors did. And that with the lack of that community, my best hope to relearn what it means to be Anishinaabe after having it beaten and tortured out of my ancestors as children, the only way I could do that is to go out on the land and listen to the voices that were talking to them all along. And we have largely forgotten that. And I mentioned that when I had the opportunity to introduce Robin Wall Kimmerer about a month ago. That can become our way of reconnecting, listening to the land. And that is what a practice of observation and just writing what it says to you down, even in short little snippets, I feel like is a way that we can reconnect not just to the world, but to each other. And it's been profound for me. Here is a Haibun poem descended from a travel-worn satchel, my second book. And what Haibun is a type of poetry where it's a mixture of prose and haiku. And it was developed by, or invented by, whatever you want to call it, Matsuo Basho, which the title Descended from a Travel-Worn Satchel is a nod to one of his travel logs called Record of a Travel-Worn Satchel. So there's a direct link where this whole book was kind of a tribute to what the Japanese poets were doing and the Chinese poets. And this is a haibun called Driving a Car from Tucson to Missoula in February. A bargain fare jet ride to Mesa, a horror show of an airport of a town. What would Matsuo think of this convenience? I would have preferred to walk, but it's just too far for the time I could liberate. On arrival, I'm grateful to be retrieved curbside, and the first tacos I eat from Arizona arrive in an aromatic bag from Jack in the Box. Safety first, bleat all the bells and whistles, sure-footed mule. The locals, uniformly swaddled in fleece and puffy down, suffer the throes of their winter. A pity. I aim to see how many green lights I can string together cruising Sweet Speedway Boulevard, once dubbed the ugliest street in America. Is it still? I'm not one to judge, but unless I'm mistaken, the weird statue of a winged bison with a tiny head that occupied the roof of a furniture store somewhere nearby is no longer here. I leave it to my fellow wanderers to determine if this constitutes points for or against Speedway's infamy. I don't know if this rumination is worthy of poetry. I'm not out here looking for the moon to rise over fucking A mountain. I am after a brace of proper tacos paired with a burrito from Los Betos, a delicacy too long unsavored. The car windows are open on a 60-degree evening in February, and the breeze is delicious. And the only thing better than my aimless driving would be a similar ramble under moon and starlight way out in the cactus-blessed desert. So many stories all headed the other way, Highway 191. My feet are wrecked. After 3 days in the Sonoran desert, flesh accustomed to wool socks and snow boots fails to adapt to being thrust into sandals for saunters over hard-packed sand and gravel. By the time I find myself at the lip of Canyon de Chelly, a holy destination I've long dreamed of visiting, cracks and blood and salve administered far too late reduce me to a painful hobble. Yet what a magnificent landscape this is, sacred and overwhelming, and proof that no matter what we do, the artistry of time and weather will have its way with us. I wish I could transform into a crow or a raven for a keener view. I wouldn't be the first to do so. Grandmother Spider weaves our fates in shadow. I smile and wave. Dark and surprisingly cold when I stop for the night in Moab. Even off its season, the place has grown unrecognizable from the one I visited perhaps a decade ago, when after a day out on a slick rock, I leapfrogged other car-bound travelers looking to claim the bulging town's last hotel room on a sizzling Memorial Day weekend. Tonight, I order a pizza. I try not to get greasy fingerprints all over my journal. I inspect the sorry condition of my feet. As motels go, this isn't the worst I've occupied. The carpet is neither black with traffic nor sticky, but it's nothing special either. Unlike Santoka, I didn't spend the day begging to afford the commendations, so I am grateful. The bed is clean and the shower is hot and luxurious. I don't have to share it with anyone not hidden in the dark corners of the ceiling either. The night is quiet. I am content. Rocks red from a brief, brutal struggle, blood or iron. Winter light is fading and the temperature is plummeting by Idaho Falls, so I call it a short day. I'm up early the next morning to navigate an interstate not so much covered by a sheet of ice, but contained in a thick shell of it. I creep along, wondering if this desert mobile has ever put rubber to such frigidity. There is no auxiliary input for the stereo, so my phone plays the audiobook of Barry Lopez's Arctic Dreams. The reader, a grizzled-voiced man who sounds like he belongs in a wind-blown shack near the top of the world, delivering stories between pores of something dangerous into a tin cup from its insert in the left breast pocket of my shirt. It's all white knuckles and prayers for at least the time it takes to make the Jefferson River. A blizzardy flurry waits for me in Butte, but that is no surprise. I could slide sideways all the way home from here if I had to. Ghosts or snow whirling through the canyon, the gates of hell. I feel like I'm already running out of time. What time is it? I'll read just a couple more. This one I dedicate to anyone who feels differented, not different, differented, othered, unappreciated, or invasive. This one is called The Coffee Weed. For being dubbed invasive when all you want to do is take root where you're planted and grow and grow and grow. Strain with all your might to the sky, open your flowers to the heat and promise of the same sun as everyone else. Did anyone ask you if where you are is where you choose to be? Said, what about here? And you said, perfect. Most of us are blown backward through life, buffeted by fate, doing the very best we can with what and where we land. Even then, the grip is tenuous, shifting soil and slope that can be washed away beneath us by turbulent water we never even knew was there. I watch the birds out my window and remember the man who told me, I don't want any sparrows around. And why not? Just like the other man who said his understanding was that beavers are invasive and destructive. And I can't help but wonder to whom and to what. Put me in the vicinity of a beaver dam. I'll build my nest with the sparrows, sing in the morning over breakfast, and brew my coffee from roadside weeds. Two more. And coming from a rock and roll tradition, I'm going to cover somebody else's poem. I read this in Poplar a couple nights ago on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. And this is a poem by Lois Red Elk, who is one of our most revered Montana poets, native poet, one of our elders, just beautiful work. She's a descendant of Sitting Bull. We all know who Sitting Bull is. And I think about the time that she's writing about and the time that Sitting Bull lived and what all was going on in the 1870s in central Montana and how those reverberations, which was not so long ago, continue to affect the way we live now. You can say the same thing about the Hellgate Treaty in 1855, just down the road from here, off Mullen Road at Council Grove. The things that happened in those days are still connecting us from both sides, all sides of the conflict. And it's important for us to remember, and I feel like this beautiful poem by Lois Red Elk called Our Blood Remembers is a perfect testimony to that. The day the earth wept, a quiet wind covered the lands, weeping softly like an elderly woman, shawl over bowed head. We all heard, remember? We were all there. Our ancestral blood remembers the day Sitting Bull, the chief of chiefs, was murdered. His white horse quivered as grief shot up through the crust of hard-packed snow. Guardian relatives mourned on our behalf. They knew our loss, took the pain from our dreams, left us with our blood. We were asked to remember the sweeter days when leaves and animals reached to touch him as he passed by. You know those times, to reach for a truth only the pure of heart reflect. Remember the holy man, peace-loving. He was a sun dancer, prayed for the people, water, land, and animals. Blessed among the blessed, chosen to lead the people. He showed us the good red road, the one that passes to our veins from earth through pipestone. Our blood remembers. In vision, he foresaw the demise of that man, the one with yellow hair. Soldiers falling upside down into camp, he saw. Champions of the people, a visionary, he taught us how to dream this ancestor of our blood. He instructed, let us put our minds together to see what life we will make for our children, those pure from God. Remember? Pure from God, the absolute gift, from our blood and blessed by heaven's stars. And we too, pure from God, our spirit, our blood, our minds, and our tongues. The sun dancer knew this, showed us how to speak the words and walk the paths our children would remember. Do you remember? And finally, this poem is actually, and this is going to sound like a sales pitch, like I ended with this on purpose, but they're selling broadsides of this, I believe, this poem called Comet, which at the time I wrote it, I thought of my father because it mentions an old Chevrolet. And what I inherited from my father was an old Chevrolet pickup that I drove for a while. and then it broke down and joined my truck in my driveway. So I was continuing the long-standing family tradition of having a driveway full of broken down trucks. But 2 years ago, I was reading on this very night, November 10th, which would have been his 83rd birthday. So that night, I was reading at the Zach. For whatever reason, as I prepared to read this poem, I felt so certain that his spirit was there, that ever since I read this, then it has always carried the association of being my dad's poem. So when the folks at Bear Scratch Press from the university, the learning, teaching, experiencing, practicing letterpress printing, asked for some poems when I was selected as Poet Laureate, and I gave them a stack, it just felt universally chosen that Comet would be the one they would decide randomly to make a letterpress print of. And then universally chosen, it so happened that the night that I would next read that poem for people in public would be on my dad's birthday. Comet. Blaze through your meager time on Earth like a gigantic rock, firing through space at an unimaginable distance from where you slide behind the wheel of an iron-plated old Chevrolet, gravel tail arcing behind you as your tires, attached to rims, attached to axle, attached to drivetrain, attached to a few decades of classic Detroit engineering, blast you away from all of your pain and frustration like a rocket into an entirely different universe of troubles. The kinetic energy of all those horses under the hood, vibrating the flesh of your legs and your belly, and you can't help but grin in spite of every little thing you perceive as wrong with your world. Not sure where you're headed, but you'll know when you get there, even if it's a crash of impact and a whomp of fireball that sends your final prayers into the sky as tiny little fortunes scrawled on pieces of smoldering ash. Miigwech, chi miigwech for coming out tonight, friends. And if we still have time, we'll still converse if you want. I'll leave that up to Celia because she's the boss. You guys want to stick around a little while longer, or have you had enough?
What happened? I feel like we just started. How is it like after 8?
That's because I like to talk.
We hadn't noticed.
Why don't we do like people who want to ask questions,
Yeah.
we could start to line up. Question I've been dying to ask Corrie is, she gets to do something that tourists from all around the world try to do every summer, and that is pet buffalo.
I don't know
What
that
is, you pet them.
You're right, I have
Yeah,
pet them.
of course you have. What is that like?
So let's give some context here so people don't think I'm that person. So in my day job, which finances my poetry habit, I work for the conservation organization American Prairie and live in Lewistown. And part of the work that American Prairie does with grassland restoration and habitat restoration involves bringing buffalo back to the landscape, which is a pretty special thing to be part of. And every year-ish, we do what's called a bison handling. And if you've ever seen, been on a ranch and seen folks handle cows, it's a little bit similar, though we try to treat them like wildlife because they are very wild. But we do that. We do disease testing because of agreements we have with neighbors. We put out GPS ear tags along with the Smithsonian Institute, who's doing research out there. We take genetic sampling. And so how that works is that we kind of move these animals really carefully and as gently as possible kind of through a series of corrals and alleys, and then they end up in what's called a squeeze chute, which sort of is like a big hydraulic press and holds them still, and then you can put an ear tag in, or if you're lucky, take a fecal sample or whatever your role is.
How does that work?
They always put the newbie on that. So when I have worked bison handling twice now, and actually we're doing it next week. So there are 300 bison waiting about 40 miles south of Malta to go through this process, and it is really humbling to like be near them and try to move them through this experience in such a way that's safe and honors them and sort of gives them autonomy so that they are doing what they want to do. But yes, when there have been bison in a squeeze chute, I have petted them. 1 year, so we now have a really fancy squeeze chute. We don't have to do this anymore. But when I first started, the bison would come into the squeeze chute, and its head, the squeeze would sort of stop here, and its head was outside the chute. And so it was my job to take a halter and put the halter over the bison's head and get it around the horns and then pull it to the side and hold it with my body weight so that it wouldn't toss its head and just like gore the vet. And so this was also like 0 degrees and like blowing snow, and I was just like covered in bison snot and like, bison blood, and I have never been happier in my whole life.
Is there a special part of the squeeze chute that squeezes out the fecal sample? These people want to know.
Unfortunately, it's still manual.
It's like buffalo is a sacred animal. I'm doing everything to ridicule this process.
I mean, it is... I don't know. So I have a colleague who recently was talking about buffalo conservation, and the way he put it was, this work is restoring the dignity of this animal. And, you can put a bison in a little alley and in a little squeeze chute, and it is still just really humbling to be near it, and its dignity is alive and well out there.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, that's how I met Corrie. I was looking at the American Prairie website, because American Prairie is headquartered in Lewistown, Montana. And Lewistown, Montana was founded in 1879 by a group of 25 Métis families who had been driven out of the Milk River watershed to the north by the Army. So this is 1879. This is 3 years after Custer got what was coming to him. 1 year after the Nez Perce were stopped by the Army on the Bear Paw Mountains, which is right near there. And I was looking to find out, what do these folks have to say about my people? Because we were the landless Indians for more than 150 years, and we were that through a concentrated effort to erase us. And I was like, these sons of bitches, I'm gonna find out. And I said, I know her, she's a poet. And we started this conversation, which I bring all of this up because American Prairie has been very welcoming to me and my storytelling and my efforts to speak against the erasure of our people. So, I'm making jokes about this, but it's a very serious thing that we do, I feel like, up there. Because there's, Save the Cowboy. What does it? Save the Cowboy, Stop American Prairie. I told them what they needed to do. They took me out to dinner after a presentation. I told them what they needed to do is get like really good at like steer roping, and then like get full Patagonia cowboy outfits, and then just like dominate the Central Montana rodeo circuit.
I can't wait till someone sends the governor the footage of this evening.
Is there anybody who had... Okay, we got a microphone moving over here. Hey.
Hey.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to see both of you in the same field of vision again. Chris, you mentioned briefly in passing actually that your favorite season is winter, which I have a very hard time relating to. But I would love to practice loving winter. And so I'm wondering if you'd say more about that and whether it affects your writing practice. Corrie, if you'd be willing, what is your favorite season? How might that shape your writing?
No, you start.
Who's the poet laureate here? No, it's really. See, the key to winter is you got to find some things that you love to do, and then do them. And there's a lot of beauty in the outdoors in the wintertime that you don't get to experience any other time of year. It's just magical in way. I mean, every season is, but winter. If you find those things that you love and practice doing them regularly, you will learn to love it. It's. I was about to say it's just part of us, but I know where you come from, and there's not a lot of winter, and you might just be fucked.
What a hopeful message, Chris.
Hey, I'm here to spread cheer.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add to that, other than I think, I was rambling earlier about like why is poetry, and I think, to me, like the point of poetry is to model a kind of attention that is rarer and rarer, and that we need more and more. And I think in the winter, I try to sort of distill that into just finding the beauty in what is happening. And winter is interesting because everything contracts and everything slows down, and we try to pretend that we're not just furry animals that want to curl up and hibernate and sleep a lot more and eat a lot more. And I think like if you can honor that a little bit, like, and you can just say, hey, everything is supposed to go slower and be a little quieter, and sort of come into a different kind of observance. That's helped me, but it's hard. It's, Montana winters, love them, hate them, gotta live through them.
Are there any other questions? Yes, over here, a couple of them.
Hi. So first of all, I just want to say to you, Chris, that your tribe is very proud of you, and we came here to see you.
Thank you.
And my question for both of you is, how do you guys get through creativity blocks, if you get them?
It's hard because I think the world that we live in now is not all that designed to create that space. And you have to do it, right? Like you have to kind of say, I'm going to go carve out time. I'm going to create the mental space that I need to notice things in such a way that are going to spark fires in my brain. And I usually can't do it in like 9-to-5 life. And I've been sort of giving myself grace about that over the last couple of years, because I had that 8.5-month residency where that's all I did. But I know that I need to find more spaces like that. And it's hard because we just, we got to pay the bills and we have all these obligations and we just have these really busy lives. And so I think for me, it's about being like, I got to stop drinking that Kool-Aid. I got to go pay attention to things that move me, and I'm going to be intentional about that. And, you just have to be sort of a lightning rod for the universe's energy, but you're not going to get electrified if you don't go stand in the storm. So
This might sound flippant, but like the only thing I'm really dedicated to still is that one sentence. So I don't really have creative blocks, because worst case, I sit down and write, today sucked, done. My work is done for the day. So you just, I think you have to have, I can say I write every day, but I don't really write what we might call productively every day. So like becoming Little Shell was at times a big struggle because of what I was like facing within myself that I was trying to put out on the page. And I would write really well for a few days, and then weeks would pass before I'd go back to it. And that was a hard thing. But I wasn't like shackling all of my creative output that's just such terrible words, but wasn't tied just to that one thing. As long as I was doing my one sentence or whatever, I felt like I wasn't failing. And so you don't really get a creative block when you have that kind of low level expectation. And yes, that sounds flippant, but it's true. I can still, if I write one sentence every day, chances are I'm going to get 10 decent poems, short little poems out of a month of doing that. And that's not bad, especially when that's all I really want to do. People ask me about that, like, well, do you get hung up on what people are going to think? And I can say with all honesty that I don't care what anybody thinks about what I write. Everything I write is for me. And every one of these little poems, no matter how long they are, is like a little short story to myself that when I go back and read it, I'm taken back to that moment. And I've learned, it took time to learn this, but I learned that as long as I do at least that much, there are people who are going to be connected to it without me even realizing it. And that's what I tell students from fourth graders through the university, that just write the dumbest stuff that you think, and that you think nobody's going to care about. And I guarantee there are many people who do and will connect to what your work, because we all share these experiences, and you don't know until you put it out there.
Hello. This is a related kind of question about process, but the one sentence journaling is really interesting, and I was just wanted to hear more about like just your overall path to getting here. You're becoming a poet, and I guess like what parts of that process feel universal, and like advice that you give to kids who you're teaching poetry, and what parts of it feel really unique to you?
I didn't set out to be a poet, and I didn't consider myself a poet until people started calling me one. And that happened after becoming becoming Jesus. That's like fixated in my brain. That didn't happen until One Sentence Journal came out. One Sentence Journal was I'd written those sentences, and I read Braided Creek, A Conversation in Poetry. That was Jim Harrison and Ted Kooser. And what that book was Ted Kooser is a former U.S. Poet Laureate, and he was undergoing cancer treatment. And as that part of that treatment, his doctor said, avoid direct sunlight. So he was going on these long walks in the early morning, and it's winter and it's cold. And he had lost his will to write. And through the course of these walks with his dog, he started kind of getting that energy back. So he would write these short little 3 to 5 line poems on postcards and mail them to Jim Harrison, who would then respond in kind. And Copper Canyon ultimately took a bunch of those and put them out in this book, Braided Creek, which is a beautiful book. And when I read that, just this little light bulb went off in my head that if I take my sentences, the ones I like, and chop them into little short 3 or 5, 7 line poems, then I'm kind of walking in their footsteps. And that's what One Sentence Journal was an exercise in doing that without ever thinking that it would be anything more than that. And it just seemed to connect to people because they're just little snapshots of my life that resonate with other people's life, especially people in Montana, birds and rivers and trees. And well, we don't have any Waffle Houses in Montana, and that remains a tragedy, but that's what I kind of backed into it, but it was pure. It was my purest expression because I had no agenda behind it, and it just happened. And that book coming out just opened up like a whole new source of inspiration and creativity to me that I've not stopped. I don't know if that really answers all of your question, but it's pretty simple.
So poetry is so introspective. As you said, you write for yourself. You don't care what other people think. And anything, it's sort of like journaling, like it's the deepest part of you. Have you guys always been very comfortable being external about sharing deepest parts of you, or has that been a process for you?
It's definitely a process. I mean, it's always, I do write like sort of intimate kind of confessional personal work, and it is always so much easier to share it to strangers, which is just a weird little contradiction of poetry, right? Like if my sister were in the room tonight, I'd be so much more nervous, even though I just write all of these poems about her. It's just, for me, it's the only thing I know how to write. And if I want to share it with people, and if I want to connect with people that way, I've just kind of had to get comfortable with it over the years, and it has gotten easier for me. But I think when you start to write poetry, like, that is the point, is to kind of like bridge that gap. And as you were saying, everybody's been there. And it is a vulnerable act, but I think that's why it's beautiful. That's why we still keep showing up.
It's worse when you write something really deep and introspective and people don't get it. That, like, for example, in One Sentence Journal, there's a couple poems where I just go deep into my love of the greasy food that often pops up on my mom's kitchen table. And people are like, God, you're kind of dragging your mom's cooking. It's like, what are you talking about? That's like the highest compliment I can make. And that was a joke. But yeah, it is. You know, I started writing songs when I was in high school, really bad, like teenager love songs. So I was already, kind of used to doing that in really badly, and kind of gave up on that. But it did teach me rhythm, economy of words, even writing bad songs. So I had this long tradition of doing that before I ever actually started actively thinking, well, I'm writing poetry now. And the two are totally different, what I do in music and what I do as in everything else. But there is a relationship there. We'll get to you.
Oh, okay.
She'll be next.
Okay. I can wait.
No, you go ahead. I can handle her.
Okay.
Kristen, I bet you're right. So much of what you draw on is nature. And I'm wondering, as a person who's moved from the country to the city and struggling with the city, how do you deal with the city in your poetry? Or would you be able to draw from the cityscape as deeply as you do from being out on the river?
I don't know if everybody could hear that. So the question is, how do I, as a nature poet, how do I draw on, like someone moving from this country into the city and having to find nature? How am I able to write about city as nature? I say the city is as much nature as anywhere else is. So we have this idea, and social media certainly contributes to that, where you've got this person hanging by one hand off El Capitan saying, here I am on El Capitan translating the I Ching. He's got the book on the other hand. And we have this idea that nature is out there. But one time, I think I saw Mara leave, but one time Mara and I, after Mara owns Fact and Fiction, it was between the store closing and an event starting, and we were walking the alleys between Fact and Fiction to the Rhino to have a beer before this event started. As we come around the corner, here's a Cooper's hawk with a rock pigeon right at its talons. And that is as wild as anything you would see in the Serengeti or anything you would see in the Lamar Valley. It's there. And that is one of the things that I've evangelized as a workshop person or as a poet, is that all of that wildness is all around us. That Cooper's hawk, the wall up on top of the parking garage is as good as a ponderosa for them when they're hunting. And to them, it's part of their world the same way it's the part of our world. And there is wildness all around us all the time. And it's one of those things that we have to pay attention to and train ourselves to look for, because from that comes the respect that we need to treat them as relatives and to preserve what they need to live the same way that we preserve our needs to live. So to me, it's the same. Okay.
So I'm a second grade teacher here at Franklin in elementary, and I'm just curious about what I try and provide my students with, a lot of just space for creativity and writing, and introduce, and you talked about acrostic poems earlier, which we do a lot of those because they connect to that a lot. And then what you were talking about your sister and things in your life, and I'm just curious where your early starts were that you maybe thought about consciously, just writing and expressing yourself creatively, and I know kids don't always know where that maybe initially starts. They're not conscious of it, but where were you maybe a little bit more conscious of that?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think yes, because I had so much license to be weird. Honestly, right? And kids are so strange. And if you let a kid write a poem and give them a little bit of parameters and just tell them that it's okay to be weird, we've all heard this, that little kids' brains are basically being on psychedelics. And so if you write a poem like that, it is amazing what kids can do if they don't feel like they're kind of squished. And so I think I was very lucky as a kid in that my sort of weirdness and creativity was encouraged. And so I was writing poems in the third grade, and my mom still has those in a box in my room. But it I think there's so much about what gets nurtured and what, examples are offered and what kids sort of feel like they have license to do. And then as they get a little bit older, being taken seriously is huge, I think.
I was fortunate in that, I was a very imaginative kid, and that wasn't discouraged in my home. I thanked my mom earlier, and there's a part of that is she was the same way. So there was this area that we would ride horses through that she called the Tolkien Woods, because it was kind of mysterious and overgrown. And so that part of what I was not discouraged. And I wasn't writing poetry when I was in junior high, but when I graduated from 8th grade, I won the reading award because I was an avid reader. And my teacher gave me a blank notebook, which back then, why would anybody want a blank notebook? Now you can get them anywhere. But then it was like a novelty. And she inscribed on the inside, "This is to help you on your way to writing your first fantasy novel." Because in that frigid room that I wrote about in One Sentence Journal is where my friends and I would play Dungeons and Dragons. And then in English class, I would basically retell our Dungeons and Dragons adventures that came out of a book, but to her, she knew nothing about it. It was all original materials. And I did nothing to discourage her from that. So I was already expressing myself.
You're already stealing like a poet.
Oh, totally. Yep. Yeah, so for me, it's the encouragement that's so important, because I was never discouraged. I don't know what my dad thought about it, but I was never discouraged from kind of living in my head like that. Maybe one more, if there is one more. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin in about 20 minutes here.
We're all still waiting for your Buffalo story.
Do you have any questions about it or about? Buffalo. I've had some encounters in Yellowstone with buffalo that they're like spiritual things, and it's kind of long. Do we really want to go there? Okay.
The people have spoken.
All right. No, that's okay. Can I go with you? So in the summer of 2022, Yellowstone Park, it was their 150-year anniversary. And they decided at that point that they were going to make a conscious effort to re-indigenize Yellowstone Park. Because as we know, the last thing that happened before Yellowstone Park became Yellowstone Park is they ran the last of the indigenous people out of it who'd been living there since time immemorial, as we say. The park recognizes 27 tribes as having existed in the park in some fashion, whether it's living there or hunting there or trading there or whatever the context is. The tribes ourselves, we recognize about 60. But in 2022, in the summer, Yellowstone set up this little, with a nonprofit organization called Mountain Time Arts, set up a little teepee village at Madison Junction, Madison Junction is like 14 miles in from the west entrance, and it's where the Gibbon and the Firehole rivers come together and form the Madison River. And there's this big, beautiful meadow there. And they set up a dozen teepees that were supposed to be, I thought, inhabited by representatives from those tribes. I was there representing the Little Shell tribe because we are recognized as, when we were the Pembina Chippewa, which is who we were before we were disenrolled and that whole story. So I'm there as the Little Shell representative, and I get there the night before it's all supposed to start, and there's no one around. There's just these 12 teepees, which was beautiful enough. Coming around the final corner when you can see them off in the distance, you know, in Yellowstone, these teepees, I mean, I stopped and amazingly I wept when I saw them. And I get there and there's no one around, and my assumption was that we were going to live in these teepees for the week that we were there. So I just throw all my shit in there and spend the night, and the next day I find out that everybody else is in the campground up above and we're technically not allowed to stay down there. And like the intermediary between Mountain Time Arts and the cultural representatives is what we are. He's like, I'm not going to be the one to tell Chris Latreille he can't sleep in a teepee this week. So I spent the better part of a week, you know, every night by myself down in this teepee. And one evening, there's a few tourists out in the meadow, and there's a pretty large group of people rehearsing a presentation they're going to do the next day. There's drumming and singing, and there's this people kind of walking across the meadow. And as all this is happening, this big bull buffalo comes down off the side of the hill and just meanders out into the meadow, and it's pretty stirring. And, you know, the park people are like, you know, don't pet the buffalo. And, you know, trying to keep people back. And this tourist, I'm sitting in a chair between two teepees, and it's about where the back wall is. And this woman comes up to me and she says, is that a real wild buffalo, or is that like a buffalo from a petting zoo that you brought to have here with the teepees? And I said, no, it's a real wild buffalo. So, you know, the evening commences, it gets dark, everybody leaves, and I go back into my teepee, and middle of the night, I get up and I walk out, and I have a headlamp, but it's so bright because of all the stars that I didn't turn it on. And I walk out back into the meadow, and I'm looking, and I can see the Big Dipper, and I feel like I'm the only person, you know, in the world out there, just reveling in the night sky like we used to be able to see here, but can't anymore, you know? And I'm soaking all this in, and all of a sudden I just hear this only it's like 3 octaves lower than that. And I kind of look around and I hear it again. And I turn my headlamp and turn it on, and I turn, and there's the buffalo bedded down about where the end of the first row is, behind one of the teepees, like 2 down from the one I'm sleeping in. And, you know, I'm well within range of where you're supposed to be with a buffalo. And I just said, I hope you have a good night, my relative. And I went back to my teepee, spent the rest of the night. Next morning, get up to make coffee, and he's still there. And I just went about making my coffee, and he gets up, kind of grazes his way along the back of the teepees and up the hill and disappears, which is a great story, right? Just for the experience of sleeping 25, 30 feet away from this magnificent relative, and that could be enough. But I got to thinking of it in the concept of how we view the buffalo as Anishinaabe people. And in Anishinaabe cultural view, we have what's called the 7 grandfather teachings. And it's like a blueprint for how you live your life, just, integrity, love, courage, strength. Bijiki, the buffalo, happens to represent respect. And I started thinking about that from this indigenous perspective, this energy we're trying to bring back to the park. And to me, sometimes buffalo is just a buffalo, and that's great, but sometimes he's Bijiki, and he is a Manitou, he is a spirit, he is a direct representation from creator of respect. And I felt he was there to join us, to welcome us as cultural ambassadors, as indigenous people, back to this place where we had been removed from and kept from for 150 years. And I think about those 7 grandfather teachings and the 7 animals that are associated with it. And Yellowstone might be, I can't think of another place in North America where all 7 of them are still living. All 7. Wolf, buffalo, bear, turtle, beaver, who did I miss? Eagle and raven. All 7 of them are in Yellowstone. Where else in North America are all 7 of them still in the same ecosystem when they used to be all over the continent? And that tells the story of what has happened to us as indigenous people too, that now we only exist in these little pockets. If you look at a map of where the reservations are and where our communities are concentrated. So the relationship between us as Anishinaabe people and our 7 grandfathers is spelled out in that place. And Yellowstone has become, for me, such an incredibly powerful place, spiritually, culturally, that I can feel it just getting anywhere near it. And there are other buffalo stories related to that, but I am going to leave it with that.
That was worth sticking around for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Corrie, so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.